This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Breaking, also known as breakdancing, is a hip-hop dance born out of the Bronx in the 70s and 80s. It's made a comeback and could be featured on the Olympic stage. In June, the International Olympic Committee voted in favor of a proposal that could bring breaking to the 2024 Summer Games in Paris. Coming up, we'll talk about that and more with local hip-hop artist John Manselle-Young, better known as Tang Sauce. He'll join us in studio. And we'll flip back to the history of breaking in Connecticut with Chion Wolf, former manager of the Peace Train Breaking and Popping All-Stars, a dance group based in Hartford, Connecticut. Were you a b-boy or b-girl back then, or do you breakdance today? You can join the conversation. That's later. First, how's the art scene doing in Connecticut? A new study surveyed the Greater Hartford region. Are you part of the arts community? How can the state better support you? You can join the conversation, 860-275-7266, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. I want to welcome into the studio Jackie Coleman. She's Senior Education Investments Officer at the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving. Jackie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Glad to be here.
I mentioned this new study looking at Greater Hartford. Why focus in on the arts? The Hartford Foundation supports many different initiatives in our state.
Well, the arts and culture sector is an important part of a vibrant community, and the Hartford Foundation is interested in the whole community. And my background is actually in the arts, even though I entered into my work at the Hartford Foundation through education.
And so tell us more about what you were trying to learn from this study. Who did you partner with to get the information?
We partnered with the Connecticut Office of the Arts, which is out of the Department of Economic and Community Development. They had an initiative that they have an initiative called the READY Initiative. I believe it's really framing their equity work. And they approached the Hartford Foundation and said, gee, we'd love to find out some data about our arts ecosystem. And we were right at that time about to launch our new strategic planning process. And we said, well, we'd love to find out here at the Hartford Foundation some further data as well. So we began to talk and then put together an RFP, and we have worked with TDC out of Massachusetts to do the study, and we found out some really important things.
You mentioned the arts ecosystem. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that? Who's part of that?
I would say that is both. Obviously, the funders are a part of that because it's important to understand the fiscal health of arts organizations, and obviously that's the Hartford Foundation's interest. All of the arts organizations, small, medium, large, and independent artists and creatives. I think that's something I've learned is a new term out in the field, and I think also even some of the for-profit arts organizations that have started to pop up now in this day and age. So it's also our community. Frankly, it's if audiences aren't going and enjoying and partaking in the arts, then there is no ecosystem.
Mm. When we think about arts organizations that get support, we think about museums, also like the Wadsworth, New Britain Museum of American Art. We think of the Hartford Symphony Orchestra, but you also mentioned community organizations.
Absolutely.
And often they are overlooked when it comes to funding.
Yes. Well, what's really interesting is we did actually ask TDC to do a breakout for us to look at the different middle-size organizations, small organizations. We asked them to look at by art form. Also, are they considered a community cultural organization? And so we're trying to take a look, at all of that data and have some conversations and see how the Hartford Foundation might be able to make some shifts in our investment strategy to kind of strengthen the sector.
Mm. And how diverse is the landscape, so to speak, in the Greater Hartford area?
We discovered that there actually is a real shortage of Latinx presence, both in, I would say, performers, presenters, artists, but also in the administration level, in the leadership level. Actually, all artists of color seem to be underrepresented based on the population. They seem to be there in the organizations, but not at the higher levels and not at the board level. And actually, the Hartford Foundation is interested in doing something about that. We're looking at developing a fellowship to really nurture some administrators of color in arts organizations, and then potentially also doing some fellowships for artists of color in the Greater Hartford region.
Mm-hmm. Is it surprising in 2019 that representation, when you mentioned Latinx and other people of color not being represented? We just did a show the other day about one of the largest Puerto Rican populations in the state of Connecticut.
Yes and no. Because, yes, it surprises me because we were talking before. I live in Manchester, and I am very thrilled with the diversity of Manchester, and I love that community and feel very integrated there. At the same time, there's still many systemic issues, I think, in all sectors, and including in the arts and culture sector. And I think it's important for us to take a look at that. And the Hartford Foundation has framed our entire strategic plan around race, place, and income. So how could we do that and not take a look at what's going on around race, place, and income in our arts ecosystem?
You can join our conversation. I'm speaking with Jackie Coleman, Senior Education Investments Officer at the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving. We're talking about a recent study looking at the arts in the Greater Hartford region. If you're part of that community, if you want to chime in about ways your community, the state can better support you, you can join our conversation at 860-275-7266 or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. I mentioned we were talking about gaps. We talked briefly about diversity, but tell us more about what the study found.
Well, the study found not only in the diversity, and I want to go back to that for 1 second because I did want to actually mention and let the listeners know that the Hartford Foundation is very interested in finding out about what we can do about the seemingly shortage of Latinx artists and leaders of color, and artists of color in general, frankly, across all of the art forms. So we actually are planning on convening artists of color in the community to have a conversation, to look at some of the data and to say, what do you think? What's missing? What do you not have? What do you need to make the sector more vibrant and more inclusive? And then in terms of other things that the Hartford Foundation discovered through our study was actually that dance was really underrepresented in our community. And that has spurred some conversations. Gee, what does that mean? Are we talking about are people not participating, like being dancers in participatory ways, or are they not going to see dance? Are we talking about all forms of dance? Is the study really inclusive of what's going on in like the Puerto Rican community? You mentioned the Puerto Rican community. That community dance is like part of their nature. So, and we have such a rich Latinx community in the Hartford region. So I think we're very curious why this came out in the study and what we can do about it.
Does a location play a part in this? I mean, is this something I mentioned, looking back over the years and looking at our population changing? We're in between New York and Boston, where they have great institutions that get lots of support. Does that play a role in where we see the arts community today and what's being funded and not?
Well, in our study, we actually did ask TDC to look at comparable cities of our size, of Hartford, and we are actually doing well comparatively across, to those cities. I think there's definitely some truth to the being between Boston and Boston and New York. At the same time, we have a rich, diverse population here, and it's our community that we want to serve, and it's our community that I believe arts and culture should be at the not the center of. I believe it should be at the center of, but a big part of, for health, for wellness, for caring about your community. We have outcomes in our new strategic plan around reducing gun violence. I believe the arts and culture sector can make a difference with that, and so does the Hartford Foundation. We're looking at some investments in the arts and culture sector that can reduce gun violence and potentially reduce recidivism. We talked about how creative placemaking and how can we use the arts and culture to lift our neighborhoods here in Hartford. Things like that.
Let's talk more about next steps, and we're going to link to this report on our website, wnpr.org/wherewelive. You mentioned reaching out to communities of color, being very direct in that, but what about some other steps from what you've found out in this study?
I think I'm particularly interested in learning more about our dance sector. So I think perhaps the Hartford Foundation would be interested in convening some dance sector folks at some point. I think in general convening is one of our tools, and I do believe the Hartford Foundation will want to convene not only artists of color, but in different ways other groups of artists as well. And there's a couple of things that we're thinking about at the Hartford Foundation connected to our strategic plan. We're thinking about, like I said, the creative placemaking. We've learned a lot about arts incubators across the country, and we're thinking, what's going on here? We've heard that there's some issue with space. and finding shared space or rehearsal space, office space, potential issues with not having enough funding for marketing. So maybe that's influencing the audience, audiences knowing about what's really happening. So we're talking to some folks about that. We're also interested in restorative arts practices, and potentially bringing in some experts in that can prepare our local artists, if they're interested, to work with our young people who have experienced a lot of violence or potentially have parents that are incarcerated. And, quality arts instruction. I'm a big advocate of the value of quality arts instruction. And there's so many models across the country. The Mosaic model for youth development through the arts in Detroit. There's some really great stuff in Cleveland that's happening out of school time in urban centers, really showing how when you're giving young people the opportunity to engage in arts, they're making a big difference in their community.
Well, Jackie Coleman, thank you so much for coming in today here on Where We Live. She's Senior Education Investments Officer at the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving. Nice to speak with you, Jackie.
Thank you so much.
This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Coming up, we talk about breaking, better known as breakdancing. You could see it in the Summer Olympics in 2024. There's a possibility there. And after the break, we'll talk about the origins of breaking in the Bronx and its influence on young people in Connecticut. Were you a B-boy or B-girl? Join the conversation, 860-275-7266, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live.
The flavor is known, you can't get jack bone, not a soprano. My voice is more a mellow tone, suckers will flake, cannot participate in the contest. Give me the trophies and titles.
This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Did you hear the Summer Olympics in 2024 may include breaking as an Olympic sport known as breakdancing? I mentioned that vote was in June, but again, that final decision by the Olympic Committee won't happen until another year. But back in the day, were you a B-boy or B-girl? Do you break today? You can join our conversation, 860-275-7266, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. We just heard from the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, hearing that dance is on the decline in the state in terms of organizations that support it. And we wanted to talk more about dance, specifically breaking. For more on the evolution of this hip-hop dance, joining me now in studio is Tim Wolf. He's former manager of the Peace Train Breaking and Popping All-Stars, a dance group based in Hartford back in the 1980s. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Also here with me is John Manselle-Young, also known as Tang Sauce. He's a Hartford, Connecticut-based hip-hop artist. Always a pleasure to speak with you, Tang.
Thank you for having me.
So let's back up and go back a little bit to breaking in Connecticut. Let's first learn a little bit more about Peace Train. Tim, tell us, what was it?
So Peace Train was a community arts organization. It started out the dream of one rather creative, eccentric guy named Paul LeMay who bought an old school bus and converted it to look like a red caboose. And it literally looked like a red caboose driving down the highway. And he started putting on music events in public parks and housing projects and senior centers and any place he could bring music. And he brought it places for free, struggled for a few years to get funding, and also brought the New England Fiddle Contest to Hartford, Connecticut. And that became kind of a legend in Bushnell Park events, growing over the course of about 6 years to drawing an audience of 80,000 people who just listened to the same fiddle tune played by different people for a full day. It sort of boggles the imagination, but I was there. It happened. And that organization, which was a real vital part of sort of Hartford summer life, there's nobody who lived in, who was a Hartford resident in those days, and I'm talking the late 70s or from the mid-70s to the mid-80s, was unaware of the Red Caboose and what it did in not only bringing music to all the neighborhoods for free, but also employing local artists and bands to do those concerts and performances. It was so successful, the city of New Haven contracted us to provide concerts in their parks and in some of the early iterations of music on the New Haven Green.
Were you a Hartford resident back then? How'd you get involved in Peace Train?
Well, I got involved when I was a high school student. I built kites, and I was passionate about it. And I went to the Knox Foundation, who was headed up by another Hartford legend, Jack Dollard, and told them about my idea of having a kite festival in Bushnell Park. And Jack said, "Sure, how much money do you need?" And I was like baffled. I was 16. I was like, "I don't know, how's $500? He said, "Sure." And then he gave me some staff, and the first kite day in Hartford was born. And from that, the Peace Train showed up to that event. And I began to meet these people and this whole network of a burgeoning and very vibrant arts community back in those days.
So you mentioned that the fiddle was a big attraction. There was that fiddle festival. But how did Peace Train go from fiddle to breaking?
So by the time the 1980s rolled around, there was the then director of Peace Train, the nonprofit, was a guy named Jack McNair, and I was the other staff member, full-time staff member as the program director. And Jack and I were looking for ways to make Peace Train a little more reflective and relevant of Hartford. It was one thing to be known for the fiddle contest, which was a very popular event. And people outside of Hartford knew less about what we did in the neighborhoods. The people in the neighborhoods knew. But we wanted to reflect those neighborhoods and what was going on. We were whiffing a cultural phenomena taking place in New York.
In the Bronx?
In the Bronx, Brooklyn, but also in various venues and getting exposure in some of the alternative arts venues in Manhattan. And one of those was the Rocksteady Crew, a crew of breakdancers in New York, and they were getting written about in alt papers like the Village Voice. So we were sort of catching on to this phenomena, but we're totally unaware. For people who were out doing shows in Bellevue Square and Stowe Village and Charter Oak Terrace, we weren't seeing breakdancing going on. So it was like, well, is it not here? And so we sort of went out and did a little detective work. Just got out and started asking people on the street, kids, if they knew about this. And you'd get some answers like, "Oh, yeah, I heard there was a crew that meets in the Anawan Street projects and blah, blah, blah," this kind of thing. And it wasn't until we walked into a record shop in downtown Hartford called Discotape, and we said to the proprietor, the manager there, a guy named Rick Torres, "What about breaking? Is it going on in Hartford?" And he said, "Give me a minute." And he and his assistant pushed back a bin of records from the middle of the floor, like, you can imagine what that weighed, and dropped the needle on a record. And they both started breakdancing in front of us on the linoleum floor right there in the record shop. And I said, okay, so it is going on here.
Did you attempt to learn breaking too?
I think that lasted, a very short minute.
And we keep saying breaking. Most people, especially in the media, we say break dancing. That's how that term became popular. But it's known as breaking.
Yeah, breaking. And then it's sort of the sister art to breaking is popping. Popping and locking, as it's been known, and which is the more sort of robotic body isolation, body part isolation kind of thing. And sometimes you'll have people who will do both, but often people specialize in one or the other of these because they really take a lot of skill, and they're sort of a different, Tang can talk to this, maybe a different set of skills. One is a little more acrobatic and the other is more dance like, although those lines may be blurring nowadays.
Well, let's bring Tang Sauce into the conversation. Obviously, you weren't born probably back when Peace Train was getting its start, but when we think about breaking, it's like a part of hip-hop. So explain that to us, and then the specific moves in breaking.
Right. So with breaking, it's part of hip-hop, and there's 4 main elements of hip-hop. You've got MCing, that's rapping. We've got graffiti, that's the art element as far as visual art goes. Then we've got breaking that we're talking about like right now, and I think I said DJing. I'm not sure if I said DJing already, but DJing and all that together is hip hop. There's some people say there's more elements, but for the main part when we're talking about hip hop, we're talking about the core 4 elements, and that's what those elements are. What was the other part of your question? I'm sorry.
I was just curious when we think about breaking, again, being part of hip hop, to describe like the different, Tim had mentioned, certain parts of breaking, you really have to be flexible and acrobatic, but how does it start? It starts with top rock?
Right. Okay, I got you.
Let's go all the way there.
All right. So let's talk about the elements of breaking specifically.
There we go.
Okay. So we've got there's elements. So the top rock, right? This is element number 1. This is kind of the more rhythmic, standing, beat catching stuff that we do before we get started. It's kind of like a warm up, if you would, right? But you got to realize with this is that this isn't just random movement. All these things that we're doing are precise movements that are different things. It's not like the dancers are just going up there and just kind of bugging out. Like everybody has their own energy, and some people will kind of wild out a little bit, but there are specific moves that they're doing as well, right? And then you've got footwork. Footwork is basically anything where your hands and feet are on the ground, right? So this is kind of like, if you could think of like a crab walk, like that could be a footwork move, So that's like 6-step, 12-step, back rock, 3-step, and 3-step kick, and all these different variations, 6-step, of course. Then you've got power moves. Power moves is like the gymnastic, high energy, wild kind of crowd appeasing. Not even necessarily crowd appeasing, but anything basically where your feet are off the ground is like power moves. So that's your flares, your windmills, your head spins, your back spins, your shoulder spins, your air flares, your 90s, all these different types of moves, which are all different moves. And I just want to point that out for people. Like all these different things that we're doing are specific, particular moves. And you have to get creative with it as well, but they're all distinguished things, right? And then the last element that I'll touch on and break in here is freezes, and that's basically any move where you're staying still for a second, kind of like if you wanted to take a picture, that's what your freeze, that you would most likely do a freeze in that instance. So those are your elements right there. They're all particular things, but it takes a lot of creativity too, because one thing in breaking that's big is biting. You cannot bite, and biting is basically copying someone's moves. And it makes a lot of sense coming from where breaking comes from, like, communities that are not in the best economic place. They kind of, you don't have a lot of things, material, So what do you have? You have your creativity. So if I make a move, that might be one of the only things that I have. So that means a lot to me. So you can't take that from me. I need that, or he or she needs that for them, because that's something that's valuable. That's something that came from them, that showed them that they can do something in an environment where you may not have all those type of you may not have that feeling ever told to you, like, yeah, you can do this, but now you know that you can do this, and you could be creative, and you can make something dope out of something that came from the top of your mind or wherever your creative flow funnel comes from, so that's breaking, no biting. Creativity.
That's Tang Sauce in studio here on Where We Live. You can join our conversation, 860-275-7266. I want to go back to Tim Wolf, former manager of the Peace Train Breaking and Popping All-Stars. Pick up on what Tang was telling us about creativity in communities that didn't have a lot of opportunities. We saw that in New York in the late 70s and 80s. And how did breaking then again, spread into Hartford, into these neighborhoods that you mentioned?
A lot of it had to do with migration. Basically, Hartford is close enough to New York. There's a lot of families with relatives and split families that, may have like one parent living in the Bronx and the other is up in Hartford. And so kids would move sometimes between these two places. And a lot of the original kids that I came to know were in crews that learned their moves from their friends or who had moved here from New York. Or these kids had gone back to see family and checked out what their cousins and stuff were doing in Queens or in Brooklyn or the Bronx, and getting exposed to this. And so they would try it out here. And it took a little while. It took a few years for it really to get up here. But I mean, kids were breaking dancing in Hartford in the late 80s, early 80s. I mean, just because I didn't become aware of it until like 82, 83 doesn't mean it wasn't going on here. And Peace Train was fortunate in that we were used to putting on shows, putting on concerts, production, that kind of thing. We could do that stuff in our sleep. And so we sort of came up with the idea of like, now that we know what's going on, let's give it some exposure. Let's have a breakdancing contest. And we sort of scheduled it for Bushnell Park, plastered the hell out of the north and south ends of Hartford on flyers on telephone poles to just spread the word. I mean, you didn't put something in the Hartford Courant. It wasn't going to be seen, you know. So you had to sort of like do street level publicity, and our phones started ringing.
What were the roles of the record shops in getting the word out and spreading this?
Well, the record shops in those days were there weren't that many, but they were in interesting locations. Back in those days, you would have record departments in department stores in downtown Hartford. That's like hard for people to fathom. First of all, that there was, aside from G. Fox's, and I'm not talking about the G. Fox record department, and they had one, but there were other record stores in more budget-minded department stores in Hartford with record departments that were catering to the needs of their customers. And those customers were people who lived in the city, who were asking for, do you have these Sugar Hill records, by the Sugar Hill Gang, Grandmaster Flash, Melly Mel, the early sort of pioneers. So this stuff started moving its way. So musically, it wasn't getting played on the radio. It was being played in the projects, at parties, at different block parties, community gatherings, someone's apartment, whatever.
You can join our conversation, 860-275-7266, as we talk about the history of breaking, also known as breakdancing. Marissa's calling from Guilford. Marissa, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for letting me share my story. I grew up in New Haven and was hanging around in downtown New Haven in the 90s with my best friend, and we saw a man breakdancing. And my friends and I just watched him and said, oh, we've got to add this to our repertoire. So we asked this man named Absalom if he could teach us breakdancing. And we started, this group of us 5 white girls started meeting with him once a week in downtown New Haven. And he gave us breakdancing lessons for about a year. And we all went off to college and continued our breakdancing. And now as a 37-year-old woman, I still bust out every once in a while with like some up-rocking and six-stepping, and people are just blown away. Like no one can believe that this is something I know how to do.
So you were one of the B-girls.
I was one of the B-girls back in the 90s. And to me, it was like a real part of growing up in New Haven to have that opportunity.
Well, thank you, Marissa, for calling in to Where We Live. Tang, when did B-girls get acceptance in the breaking world, so to speak? Because it was primarily B-boys that were doing it.
Right. Always, but things are starting to come to the forefront more like nowadays, and B-girls are starting to get their well-deserved shine. Like there's this, the main competition in breaking and is called BC1, Red Bull BC1, and it used to just be pretty much male-dominated, and it's basically the top 16, B-boys and B-girls from all around the world, and so what they did, I believe it was just last year, they had a separate competition for the B-girls, and it's so cool because you really get to see the B-girls get their well-deserved shine, which is so cool because there's so much talent, and I'm really glad to see it, and shout out to all the B-girls out there doing your thing because, we love y'all.
Tim, you again were former manager of the Peace Train Breaking and Popping All-Stars, this dance group based in Hartford in the 80s. This was an all-boy group?
It was, yeah. Unfortunately, we really didn't see any female participation in those days. It was a pretty male-dominated thing. I will say, as far as the girls went, they dominated and ruled in Double Dutch. And Double Dutch was huge. I would say Double Dutch, without getting sort of the same kind of credit, played as significant a role in kids in their physical health and social and cultural participation in something that was, I mean, even though it was practiced, Double Dutch jump roping was practiced in non-communities of color. In communities of color, it was played a really, I would say, a more vital role. And part of the support, in the same way that Peace Train was able to support as an organization, an organization that received funding from foundations and corporations to do the things we did, Double Dutch had as its main sponsor, certainly in Connecticut, was United Technologies, who at the time was very involved in supporting sort of arts programming and things like that. And so it's no small coincidence that because of the support Double Dutch got in Connecticut, that the world champion teams in the 80s were from Hartford.
So when we talk about the popularity of breaking back when you were managing Peace Train Breaking and Popping All-Stars, tell us some of the places the dance group performed and what was the reaction?
Well, the dance group, I should just go back and say, from that first contest we had in Bushnell Park, where we had 20 crews competing and 10,000 people showing up to watch them, which was mind-blowing in and of itself. That there was that much sort of just grassroots support for the art form. We recognized immediately that these guys needed more of a platform, and that's when we formed the All-Stars. In fact, a few days after the breakdancing contest, which got this great exposure to these kids, we had them, the winners, open up for the Alvin Ailey Dance Company, which we were presenting in Bushnell Park later that week. From there, once we formed the All-Stars as a group of about 4 or 5 crews, including about 25 kids, boys from age maybe 6 to 18, we developed a program to basically take them into schools, suburban schools, to do assemblies and lecture demos on hip-hop and breaking and popping. So I would alternate, when we would use one crew or another, so they weren't getting taken out of school all the time, but their parents in the schools were cool with it because it was giving them exposure to other students in other communities and going to other schools, and they were learning how to be presenters. And so let's say we would go to an elementary school to do an assembly in Litchfield County. These kids, we'd bring our own little portable sound system. We'd have our mixtape of good beats and everything. And then we basically let the kids, the breakdancers and the poppers themselves, present to those other kids, this is what we do. They'd demonstrate it, and then they'd invite kids to come up from the audience. And I'm sure, Tang, you might have done one of these or two in your day. But so we were doing this, and we did dozens and dozens of these, and also would because we were getting known, we would get calls and get booked. The group performed at halftime at a Boston Celtics game in Hartford Civic Center. We were featured in a Hartford Symphony Pops concert in the Bushnell, where the kids came up breaking and popping from a lift in the floor of the stage.
That's awesome.
Well, we did. I know you're having the Hartford Stage Company on later. We performed at the Stage Company. Oh, we did all sorts of things, and traveled as far as New Hampshire to perform. And
so would you say Connecticut was seen as a trailblazer in spreading this?
It was. As best as I could tell in those days, we were the only ones. We were the first statewide breakdancing contest in the country. And we did that in the following year, in 1984, and with regionals in New Haven, Waterbury, Bridgeport, and Hartford. So, yeah, we were lighting a match.
Tim Wolf is former manager of the Peace Train Breaking and Popping All-Stars. It's a dance group based in Hartford, Connecticut in the 1980s. We're going to continue talking about breaking. We're going to hear more from Tang Sauce, John Manselle-Young, who's a Hartford, Connecticut-based hip-hop artist, about the resurgence in breaking and how he got started. And we'll hear more from Hartford Stage, a really interesting performance coming up here in Hartford. This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Today we're talking about breaking with Tim Wolf, former manager of the Peace Train Breaking and Popping All-Stars. This was a dance group based in Hartford, Connecticut back in the 1980s. And John Manselle-Young, also known as Tang Sauce, a Hartford, Connecticut-based hip-hop artist. If you break today, you could join our conversation, 860-275-7266. We were learning about a little bit of the history of breaking coming to Connecticut, influenced by New York, Tang Sauce. When did you get introduced to breaking, and when was the resurgence? When did it happen, the resurgence?
Right. So I pretty much came in during the resurgence. So I believe it was around 2004, a movie called You Got Served came out, and that was a big phenomenon that really raised the awareness of breaking to like my generation in a major way. So that's around 2004. I'm in middle school. This movie comes out and all my friends are breaking. And it was something that I heard about, growing up. I had an older cousin and an older brother that were into hip hop, like during like what's called the golden era of hip hop, during late 80s, 90s. And so they put me on to like breaking, but it was sort of something that I heard about, and maybe I had seen a video once of it on like MTV or something like that, but it wasn't anything that I was super exposed to till 2004 when this movie comes out, and then we see people doing all types of crazy moves. People are doing like spinning on their head, they're doing flares, they're hitting beats, and we're just like, yo, what is going on? So we started trying it ourselves, just trial and error. We didn't have any teachers. We definitely were getting in trouble for it a couple times at school. Because we just had that passion. We didn't have like a place to go with it. But so I hope that with b-boying getting more exposure now that things start to come around for like kids that are young and doing it now, because it's definitely something very athletic. But anyway, so that was around 2004, and that I got introduced to that, and it was super amazing. At the same time, the internet was booming too. So there was websites like you could check out like bboy.com back in the day. There was B-Boy World, and there was even bboy.org, which was a big thing back then. And basically you could there wasn't too many videos on there, but you would see like a big battle is like freestyle session. That's one of the biggest battles in the world every year, and you would see like a clip, like a 5-minute clip, like 180p, and it would take like 5 minutes to download to watch like a 2-minute video, when you're using dial-up or whatever. But you would watch that and you would just run it back a million times, and you'd be like, wow, this is really, really amazing. What did he even just do, And so you had to really watch what was going on, and there'd be forums, so you could build your little profile, and things were just kind of developing, But the internet really helped in a major way to really bring a lot of consciousness to breaking, and that was that wave right there, 2004. And there was some crews, because things kind of slowed down, like near like late 90s, 2000s. But there was some crews that were like still doing it, like I think like of Shadow and Earth was still doing it during that time out here out of Middletown. A couple other crews, I think LOZ, a couple different crews were still Lost Unknown, doing the thing throughout it, and much respect to those crews that were still doing the thing, because really because of them, like we're still doing it out here today.
Tang, do you mentor kids today who are interested in breaking? And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about, we're hearing headlines that July is now one of the most violent months that the city of Hartford has seen in a long time. We look at the how hip hop hop and breaking evolved from New York City. It was a way for some to escape or get a break from gang violence. And I'm just curious, when you talk with youth that are interested in breaking, what do you hear from them today?
Yeah, today the youth, they're just as curious as they always been, you know. They would definitely want to get down, and with the internet as big as it is now, they definitely want to just really soak it all in, and they definitely are, and doing it in a major way. This generation coming up, they have so much potential. It's crazy right now. So I'm super excited to see. And I'm just glad that breaking we're still around, because you're saying, you know, there's so much, not even just violence, just like tough vibes to deal with going out. But you see with breaking, you know, people, I'm not sure if it's because like we're close to the earth, like kind of like how KRS describes it, like when you're doing a freeze, a lot of time your head is literally on the ground. And I think there's something very humbling in that, you know, you're on the same ground that people are walking, you know, coming from outside wherever their shoes were, but you still, I want to express myself in this way. And I love it so much that I'm still, no matter what, going to put my head on the ground to do this freeze because this is my art, you know? And I think that's very humbling. So it comes with humble vibes a lot of time. I mean, there's a couple times, you know, with breaking with it, you'll have some people with like different egos and stuff like that. But for the most part, you know, it's very, very down to earth people. And I think that's important for the kids to be around. And I think they kind of feel that, you know, before they even get that knowledge. You could feel the energy coming off of it, you know? And so like when I'm like dealing with the young kids, I'm Mr. Peace, Love, and Positivity, so I'm always going to put the peace, love, and positivity out there, and just tell them just to keep doing it, stay consistent, you know, don't give up, you know, just keep trying, and it's super cool too, because like with breaking, like you'll look at it, well, a lot of people look at it, I know I did before I got started, like, yo, that move that guy just did, man, that's nothing, I could do that right now, and then you try it, and you're like, oh man, that wasn't easy, because you crash. Crash is when you fall and breaking. You end up crashing, and you're like, dang, what the heck? I thought I could do that. And then like, you know, you keep trying it for a year, and then you're able to do it. But it gives you a lot of humility and respect for what you saw that other person just do, because you really understand where they're coming from and what it took to get to that level for that move that might have seemed like a flashy, easy move. It takes a lot of dedication and work. So I think the kids, they're soaking that in. They're doing real good, and I just tell them to keep doing their thing, because I remember when the people that I looked up to when I was coming up, they would tell me the same thing, like just keep doing it, you know. And if you're a b-boy out there, just keep on giving advice to, or a b-girl out there, just keep giving advice to the younger generation as you see fit. You know, use your experiences to help enrich them, because they're standing on our shoulders, but eventually we're going to have to use them to fall back on, you know, because they're going to be organizing the events. Eventually, they're eventually going to be on the top of the scene eventually, and that's going to be when we're kind of out of commission, and we want to, you know, our future, our legacy is in their hands. So, you know, you got to treat them right and teach them the right elements and the right pieces of knowledge and the right gems in order to get them to the right spot. You know what I mean?
Yeah, when your neck is too sore to do those fancy moves. Speaking of youth, there's a really interesting summer program, which I believe you were involved in at one point, Tang Sauce. I wanted to bring into the conversation Nina Pinchin, who's Associate Director of Education at Hartford Stage. Nina, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Such a pleasure to be here.
I understand that there are young people at Hartford Stage that are blending breaking with Shakespeare. Tell us about that.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a program. It's called Breakdancing Shakespeare. It's one of the neighborhood studios programs for the Greater Hartford Arts Council. So we're one of their studios for youth employment. And every summer we bring in sort of 15 teenagers, and we work on a Shakespeare text, and we infuse that Shakespeare text with hip-hop and breaking.
And so tell us, this is more than just a summer camp where kids are involved with something. I mean, they're getting paid to perform and to learn the lines and the moves?
Absolutely, absolutely. So part of the idea is that you can sort of level the playing field for young people so that you know, some young people can afford to be spending their summer in a paid training program for dance or for acting. This is a paid job, and for many of our apprentices, it's their first paid paid job, but they're here with us this summer doing the work of dancing most of the day every day, and acting most of the day every day. So they really do earn their stipend every week.
So tell us, for our listeners who are interested in seeing this performance, Midsummer Night's Dream, tell us where they could see it and what time.
Yeah, so we're at Hartford Stage the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of August at 7 p.m. Tickets are $10, and they can be booked through the website, or certainly you could come to the door on those days. And it really is something magical. So I encourage all to come and see.
So that's the Breakdancing Shakespeare production of A Midsummer Night's Dream coming to the Hartford Stage. We'll have more information on our website at wnpr.org/where we live. Nina Pynchon, thank you for telling us about it here on Where We Live. Tang, what do you remember about being involved with the Breakdancing Shakespeare?
Man, one of the most great experiences of my young teenage life, for sure. Wow, I remember just, I was in school, and my friend had done the program the previous year, which was the first year, which was Romeo and Juliet. And then my year was Midsummer's Night's Dream. And I say, okay, you know what? We're going to get paid to go break, like whatever, like let's go do it. I got to go to Hartford. What do I got to do? Because we was young and broke, but whatever. So we get down there, and they say, okay, so this is what the audition consists of. We're going to act you to act, just like whatever, like, just kind of do your thing, and then break. Okay, so obviously I got down on the breaking part, and then, because I had been doing it for a little while. And then, the acting part comes around, and you're like, okay, whatever, like, whatever you guys want me to do. It's called Breakdancing Shakespeare, whatever. So, you do the acting part, and then, you're just like, okay, I guess that was cool. Now on to the next part of my day. And then you get a call back. You're like, oh, dang, a call back. Did I mess up? Was that bad? And you're like, okay, whatever. We'll do the call back. And then you're reading some extra lines. I'm like, oh, okay, dang. I don't what. I hope I didn't do anything wrong. So then, you get a call a couple weeks later that you get the one of the leading roles of like Oberon in this play. And like, for me, I always knew like I kind of had like a little grip on like the English language, but I didn't really have an outlet for it.
Come on, Tang. Yeah. Give yourself some credit.
little something, So so that what that did for me was provide an outlet for me that I would have never thought of. And I've continued to act in various productions, and I love acting, and I don't know if I would have ever really touched upon it if it wasn't for Breakdancing Shakespeare, because it exposed me to it in a new way. And I loved it so much because it was so diverse. Like, I was a kid coming from Manchester, pretty diverse school, but I got to be around people that were doing things different than me, like, again, in a different way, because these are kids, like, you're exposed to kids like that are going to the academy that like want to become like actors and dancers like full time, and it's kind of different because you're in a regular high school, it's like a bunch of different people that want to do a bunch of different things, but to see somebody that was like specifically like in the art for like this is what they want to do at my age was like, oh man, this is cool. And they're coming from like different like backgrounds, like ethnically and probably economically, so like it was just super cool to be around them. And I think that's probably one of the most important programs that's like around that I've ever seen, like in the arts period. It's such a great experience. And then you learn about like having to execute things like on point. I mean, outside of the battle, of course, in the battle you have to execute, but in another you're exercising different muscles, the Shakespearean, if you would, muscle, and you're learning about these different things.
Well, Tang, we're almost out of time. I wanted to go back to Tim Wolf. Tim, you've seen the beginning of breaking and now the evolution. I mean, what's your reaction to how you've seen it change?
Oh, I love to see the resurgence. There was a little lull there for a decade or so, it felt like, especially as far as the dance goes. Mm-hmm. What was happening, though, was the whole rap scene was exploding and becoming an international, commercial success and phenomena. And the talent that's around is, especially in Hartford and Connecticut, it gets overlooked a lot, but it's right here. It's right under people's noses.
And we'll have to leave it there. Tim Wolf and Tang Sauce, thanks so much for joining us today here on Where We Live.
Thanks.
Peace.
Today's show produced by Lydia Brown. Thanks to Carmen Baskoff and Chion Wolf. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel.